what I call the trampoline effect with technology. So if you look back, many of us that have been in the space, like you said, since we were 12 or since we were 5, I'm not going to properly age myself today. We started with job ads, right? My first HR job, I was getting resumes faxed to me. I don't even think young people know what a fax machine is. But then, fast forward, early mid 2000s, we started to see this big advent of technology. And it was super exciting, but also organizations were really scared. What do we do? Do we need social media policies? And then we went all in on technology. And then all of a sudden it was just overwhelm and overload. And so you saw a lot of organizations pause, refresh tech stacks, take a look. And now with AI, we're back again. So what's really interesting is we're back in technology, but now the need isn't necessarily for more tech. It's for better tech, smarter tech, and more strategy. That is really exciting to me because in this space and in our industry, that's the piece that is consistently missing is really good strategy.
This is Shaker Unfiltered, where we break down the full world of recruitment marketing, from talent attraction and employer branding to MarTech and analytics. Join us for real stories, bold ideas, and practical insights that help you stay ahead and take your talent strategy further. Let's get into it.
All right, folks, that's right. We're here with a whole new season, a new look, new feel, Shaker Unfiltered live at the Vision Lab. And our guest today, Susan LaMotte, a pioneer in the field of employer brand. As founder and CEO of exaqueo, Susan has spent more than 2 decades shaping how organizations think about talent, work, and the relationship employees have with their employers. Before launching exaqueo, she led global employer brand and talent strategy efforts for major brands like Marriott and the Ritz-Carlton. Her work helped set the stage for many of the practices that we see in the industry today. At exaqueo, Susan built innovative models that move beyond traditional employer value propositions. These include the whole self model, the idea of source of influence over source of hire, and new frameworks for candidate experience. She holds an MBA from Vanderbilt, an MA in Human Resource Development from George Washington University, and a BA in Communications and Public Relations from Virginia Tech. Now, with exaqueo joining the Shaker family, Susan continues to expand the reach and impact of her work. So, let's put our hands together and welcome Susan to the show. Susan.
Hey, John, how are you?
Hey, I'm amazing in the moment. How are you feeling?
I am feeling great. Really excited about the next step for exaqueo and our future together.
Absolutely, absolutely. So tell me, where are you joining us from today?
Today, I am in sunny Charleston, South Carolina, but it's not going to be sunny for long. Apparently, I looked at the weather. It looks like rain for the next 10 days, but it is hurricane season. So to be
Ooh.
expected here.
Well, it is the changing of the season, which in Dallas, really, we don't see that until like January. So that's fine. That's fine. Well, look, I've got there's so much going on. So, a lot of exciting things. I'd love to jump right in. So look, you've been a leader in this space for a long time. And that means you started when you were 12. And so here we are in your 20s, you're crushing it. But I'd love to start at higher level. So when you think about where employer brand is today, what excites you the most about it? Especially the evolution of this work?
I think what's the most exciting about employer brand and where we are today has been what I call the trampoline effect with technology. So if you look back, many of us that have been in the space, like you said, since we were 12 or since we were 5, I'm not going to properly age myself today. But we started with job ads, right? My first HR job, I was getting resumes faxed to me. I don't even think young people know what a fax machine is. But then, fast forward, early mid 2000s, we started to see this big advent of technology. And it was super exciting, but also organizations were really scared. What do we do? Do we need social media policies? How do we handle this? And then we went all in on technology. And then all of a sudden it was just overwhelm and overload. And so you saw a lot of organizations pause, refresh tech stacks, take a look. And now with AI, we're back again. So what's really interesting is we're back in technology, but now the need isn't necessarily for more tech. It's for better tech, smarter tech, and more strategy. That is really exciting to me because in this space and in our industry, that's the piece that is consistently missing is really good strategy.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, and I think we're in such a rush of tech, like hyper accelerated tech advancement now, where uh, the rules are being rewritten literally by the second. So as soon as you start to get comfortable with something, there's like 10 giant leaps ahead. That being the case, right? And I think there's still a lot of work in the education around employer brand space to do. I think our leaders are getting better, but there's still a lot of thought around employer branding being campaign specific or campaign or creative messaging only, right? But I think your perspective is fascinating because it's always gone deeper to more of an operational level, more systemic level. So, from your point of view, what does it really mean to embed employer brand into a company's business systems, not just stay at campaign level?
Yeah, I think it's very important to think about how employer embeds in your organization the same way that our colleagues in marketing did it 10, 15 years ago, which is we're not transacting with customers, we're building relationships. And if, you recall, that set off a whole flurry of customer experience work and customer journeys and customer relationships. And so over on the people side of the business, we said, oh, we should be doing that too. But the challenge is we weren't necessarily as an industry strategic in how we did it. It was let's create a journey. And it still created this process or this transaction. So for me, I really would love to see our industry make the same shift and really embrace human behavior even more so than we've done in marketing. Because I always say jobs put food on your table and a roof over your head, right? The way that I can feed my family is through working. The way that I can make sure my children are taken care of. Those are very visceral, personal needs, different than, maybe the phone I buy or the cup of coffee. You would argue that it's so much more important to feed your family. And so I think that's the interesting thing for me is I don't think our industry has truly grasped that yet. We're still so focused on the transaction. And that
Yeah.
probably is the thing that drives me the most crazy and why we can't get there, why we can't really look at employment as a relationship when we should be.
That's Listen, I think you just read my mind and the cries of many of us in this space for years. Why do you think that it's still, right? Let's give it like 15, 20 years, let's say, respectively, of employer branding being a thing officially. Why do you think that there's still this hesitancy or this lack of adoption of this more human centered approach versus transactional? Why is it still just butts and seats in the minds of leadership or employers?
Yeah, I think it boils down to influence and dollars, right? At the end of the day, what are customers doing? Customers are putting money in the pockets of the organizations that they're buying products and services from. Whereas people are still, in many cases, the biggest line item on your P&L as an organization, particularly the benefits that you provide your people. Healthcare is often the biggest line item on a company's P&L. And so it's really challenging to argue that you should put all of your resources, your efforts, and your perspectives into focusing on that. I think the second piece is that employer brand is a function because it had its roots in talent acquisition, the first part of the employment relationship, right? Awareness that a job or a company exists. And then, of course, that journey to taking the job itself. Many organizations are still limiting this function or this industry within talent acquisition and in a corner of talent acquisition, right? Which is just talent attraction or just recruitment marketing. And those of us that have been doing it for a long time, you know this, right? Employer brand is branding and marketing the entire journey. So you're not just attracting talent, but you're also retaining it. And it's really hard to have any influence on the retention piece or even the onboarding piece if you're stuck as a recruitment marketing professional in that corner of talent attraction and talent acquisition. And that just boils down to company politics, right? It's if you're working
Mhm.
what level in Fortune 500 company, if you're consistently at the manager and director level, it's really hard to influence unless you have one massive piece of research that has really impactful data that can help drive the discussion. unless you find leaders in your organization, a VP or a particular business unit or geography that sees the value and wants to pilot test some of it. It just makes it really challenging to make a name for yourself and to try to prove that value when you're stuck in a corner.
Total. And I've yet to see a VP of employer brand at, a massive organization yet. I
Yeah.
think that
There's a couple of them, but not many, not
yeah, there's
many.
like a few.
Yeah.
I've seen 1 or 2 maybe in my career, but it is rare. Um, and I think you make a really good point. It's where EB is or recruitment marketing is housed, right? That then unfortunately takes on whatever the influence or validity in leadership's eyes based on that, based on where it's housed. And I'm
Yeah, for
starting
sure.
yeah, are you seeing more, EB practitioners even now moving into the marketing space or the comm space? Or
I
what's your
think
take on that?
that's the perennial debate, right? Is where should EB sit? If I had a buck for every LinkedIn thread around where does your employer brand function belong? For me, it's less of where it sits and it's more the level of influence. I would argue that the chief human resources officer should be a chief employment relationship officer. The same way that your CMO is responsible for the whole journey, right? And the entire relationship you have with the customer, so should the CHRO. And the challenge is most CHROs spend so much of their time on the transactional piece, right? Either on the tech stack or the tech stack contracts or benefits or the legal piece. And so your strategies tend to shift into that transactional piece, which means it's really hard to make the case to say, oh, it should be about employee experience. Some organizations have tried, and you'll find VPs of employee experience, but no one is looking at it that I have seen. Please prove me wrong, people. Prove me wrong. That the CHRO is focused on that relationship because that's where the money is. That's where the
Yeah.
value is. Glassdoor just did that big study. I don't know if you saw it on the impact of layoffs and the cost for an organization well beyond the actual cost of the layoffs. There was one organization they calculated up to $20 billion in additional costs due to turnover, disengagement, all of those pieces. So if we can monetize some of that and measure some of that, the energy might be there, but we're just spending a lot of time on the transaction. We're spending a lot of time just on the what's the campaign, how many clicks. All that stuff is important,
Mhm.
but you still need a strategy to go along with it.
Sure. I guess it would require sort of this mindset shift from near term, short term solutioning, right? To fill the wreck, get the people going, generating revenue, product, whatever the case may be, versus that 20 was it 20 billion uh, in additional costs related to turnover and hiring. Like that's uh, yes, it would require a bigger view, right, an expanded purview. But I think also we have to make the case better as well. And I think there's been a tough time when it comes to analytics and data to showcase that, which is a good transition because I think at Shaker we talk a lot about how the employer brand, the talent attraction, the Martech, and the analytics all have to work together. And so when you think about the impact of this work, when all of those areas come together, where do you see, I guess, something that would support these shifts that we're talking about in more long-term thinking? How do
For
we
me, it's
leverage these?
yeah. For me, it's data that moves the needle. So it's not just the one time set of data that you look at once a year, but it is regular data and insights. And those are two different things, but regular data and insights that you can actually see, okay, we did X and now we're measuring Y. And that costs money, and that's the challenge, right? The actual investment that we make. I think in human resources, we've done a good job of investing in data. We haven't done a good job in investing in the regularity of it, nor have we in the insights. So when we think about the value, for example, of all of the MarTech work and analytics and actually measuring the effect of the technology, but organizations really struggle in then connecting that back to the actual relationship. What does it mean, for example, if I'm influenced by an ad I see to go apply for a job? What does it mean 2 years later, after I've taken that job? How did that initial influence carry through? And did it change my behavior? And now, 2 years later, do I feel like the promise was delivered? And do I feel like I'm going to then communicate that promise to the next person? And part of it, John, is, we live in a really reactive world right now. That's how our leaders are operating. Everything is very bottom line driven, particularly if you work for a public company. And of course, right, we live in a capitalistic country, particularly in the US. So that's not a surprise. But what is a surprise are these short term moves everyone is making to move a short term needle when it comes to finance,
Yeah.
as opposed to having the long view. And it's harder to make a case for these kinds of investments when your leadership is in that reactive mode.
hmm Absolutely. I love that you made the distinction. You drew the distinctive line between data and insights, right? And I think, historically, I'll say maybe in the past 10 years, it was really about getting access to data. We've had a lot of technological advancements, platforms that have come out to collect all this data, but now you still need to make sense of it all. And I think that's where you really shine in terms of bringing the insights to help move the needle, not just from the back end, the employer brand, and then ultimately the attraction work, but even at the research front end, right? And EVP development. Talk to me a little bit about that in terms of how you approach historically data and insights to help shape the narrative.
Always like to look at problems that organizations have and seek to understand why it's a problem. As you said it really well around this notion that we've had data for a while. And over the past, many years in HR, particularly with, the bloating of tech stacks, we have a lot of data. There's no doubt about it. And HR organizations have done a really good job, so has HR tech, in getting us that data. But I kept trying to uncover, why is it that we can't make any change? Why is it that we're still seeing, such low levels of engagement, that candidate experience sentiment has not moved? And if it has moved, it's gotten worse. Why are all of the problems in an echo chamber? Why haven't we made any changes? And I think part of it is we have so much data, we don't know what to do with it. And our leaders are conditioned to getting that data once a year, right? So you sit down, you get your employee engagement survey, and you're like, okay, here are our problems. And that's a lagging indicator. So you're looking backward. You're not looking at the current environment you're in. You're not positioned for how that environment changes cyclically right now, sometimes on the daily. And so ultimately, what we try to do is take a look at the relationship real time that employees have with a particular organization, and then uncover, how do you actually find people that want to be in that relationship? So, for example, let's say, shout out to our military community. We know that if you are in the military or you're a military spouse, that is a challenging life, right? I have a cousin who's a lieutenant colonel in the Army. They've moved no less than 15 times. And that's really challenging all over the world, right? Two young kids. Why do I bring that up? Because for many people who are looking to get into a relationship with someone in the military, that is just part of that relationship. It is an expectation like, hey, if I'm going to have a career in the military, this is what my life's going to be like. You need to know that and be comfortable with that. That's why we collect the data we do on the employment relationship. Because if we can help organizations understand, here's what your relationship looks like today, let's be really authentic about it. And let's make sure everyone's really clear what kind of relationship they'd be getting into at this company on multiple levels,
Sure.
at the organizational level, the leader level, the colleague level, and then the work level. And let's make sure you're okay with it. So you don't waste our time. We don't waste your time. It's not just authenticity, it's reality. It's getting into the depth of it and what it's really like. It's like not just saying, like, first date, what's the problem? Why is this guy single? He seems amazing. And then, 10 dates later, you're like, oh, now I get it. It's trying to get that out on the front end as much as possible and uncover it.
Sure.
So people become pleasantly surprised instead of overly disappointed.
Look, so I love that you've connected dating to the talent space, because I've often said this is like the pathway to marriage, right? Like the application is the first swipe, and then ultimately you walk down the path. But the interesting thing is those insights that you're bringing to the table about the reality, right? And I love that you said it's not just authenticity; this is reality. There's things that employers need to know about the audience, the demographics, the life challenges, the life realities of the candidates that they're trying to attract. And conversely, candidates have to know, or should certainly be shown, what reality is like as an employee in this organization. I think we focused a lot on that part, but not the part that you mentioned around companies becoming more not only self-aware but empathetic to the candidate reality. The interesting thing, and I think I would love to hear your perspective on this, drawing all of those insights out through the data collection that you do on the front end to then shape an employer brand narrative. What what have you seen in terms of companies now responding to those insights and then, being intentional about either leaning into or making the shifts cross-functionally where they need to change and meet more of that aspiration and bringing that into reality?
Yeah, I think the shift is in the complexity of a relationship. Human beings are very complex, complicated individuals. And in the early days of employer brand, some of you that have been doing this for a long time probably remember back in the early 2000s, I think it was Bain that invented this four block. And it was let's find out through research at your organization, what do you do really well, right, in terms of delivering an employment experience? And then what do employees actually want? And so what it created was a four block where the top right corner was we do this really well and our audience wants it, right? Candidates want these things. And then, some of the other three blocks were things we don't do well that candidates don't want. Great, we can ignore those things. Things that we do really well but candidates don't care about. Okay, great, maybe we lower our investments. And then the things that we don't do well but candidates really care about. We should look to fix those things strategically. It was a great start. It was very strategic. It was very focused on let's break down what we should sell. The challenge and how that's evolved is that that's what laddered up into the original version of value proposition. Let's sell the 4 or 5 things that are great about working for this company. The problem is that works really great when you're trying to sell a phone, right? Or a piece of technology. When you're trying to sell volume and mass and you're hitting at customer needs on a very even level, right? Like when you think about what you really want in a phone, the majority of customers kind of align on those things. That's how Apple makes decisions. That's how, all of the companies make their product decisions. Humans are different. We all have really different needs at really different times. So you put 20 healthcare workers in a room, let's say nurses right now, put them in a room. Some of the needs will be similar, but as you start to kind of peel back the onion, if you will, depending on where they live geographically, depending on who they are as humans, what they want in their lives, what do their families look like, what do they personally value, where are they on the political spectrum, all of those things. Now the differences are multitude. And so it becomes really important to think about the employer brand not just as a surface level of 4 or 5 attributes to sell, but rather how do you actually position them? And I'll give you an example. If we break down the research that you might do into what do you like about working for the organization? What's that relationship like? What about the relationship you have with your leaders, the relationships you have with your work, and the relationships you have with your coworkers? And you break it down, you might find that there's some segments that value certain things in those layers or in those dimensions differently. Then that's where the fun is because then you can tactically adjust your campaigns. If you're running a campaign for nurses, let's say in the Midwest, and you find that in this particular area of the Midwest, they really care deeply about colleagues, then you can adjust the campaign to hyper focus on those things. And particularly with the advent of AI, that's not hard to do anymore. If you find, for example, in other places, maybe for younger nurses, they care more about the organization, then you can adjust your campaign that way. But if you're just focused on 4 things and you only adjust slightly for demographic or geo, you're not actually getting at the complexity of the human.
Mm.
That's where it gets really fun. And that's where you get focused to your organization instead of, reading some Gen Z study and saying all Gen Z care about X when we know that that's not true. You can really compete more effectively because you're hyper focused on your candidate and intersecting with your organization.
Oh, that's so rich. You actually answered the next question, funny enough, around is it a losing value proposition to only segment or to focus on a particular generation, right? And I remember, not so long ago in the distant past, millennials were up and coming to be the largest generation in the workforce. And so every company was trying to figure out how do we, appeal to millennials, whether it was workspace, whether it was perks and cause driven and all these other things. And now we're right back at it again with Gen Z and even Gen Alpha. What are your thoughts there in terms of focusing on a generation at a time as a whole, right? But you clearly said that's the miss because you're not getting into, the nitty-gritty, the nth degree details and the I want to say, dare say, diversity within demographic cohorts.
It's funny you ask. So, yesterday, two of my colleagues delivered this really robust insights report on Gen Z to one of our Fortune 100 clients. And one of the things that was really interesting is the client called out how much more they like this study. We did one for them in 23. They really like that, but they like this one much better. And one of the reasons why is the one we did in 23 pulled from a broader study that we did on all of Gen Z. This one, while we pulled outside sentiment and external research, it was a combination of external research of people who this organization would actually target to hire and internal Gen Z individuals who categorize as Generation Z that are actually employed or have been employed in the organization in this particular program talent segment that we were studying. So the data was really specific to them. And that's what matters. It's not necessarily that you want to ignore generations or that it's, all the same. It's that Gen Z in this particular organization is experiencing in their day-to-day work a certain kind of work experience. That, this is a company that is hospitality entertainment. It's not healthcare. And so their experience is really different. So that allows you to target the questions. You can ask really specific things about their experience. And then you can ask external candidates how they would perceive that. Are they interested in this kind of experience? So, like years ago, for example, we did a project with a cruise line, and the data, right? If you ask potential cruise line candidates, they have no idea what living conditions are like on a cruise ship for crew, right?
Hint,
But if
they're
you
not
can
great.
Right, well, if you can give them the detail, if you can say, "Hey, how would this experience be for you?" It doesn't allow them to imagine it. You're actually putting it in front of them, and then you can actually test later, "Okay, you took the job. You're in the experience. How does it feel now?"
Right.
We very rarely have the opportunity to do that in our space, and I wish we did more of it.
Yeah, that sort of follow-up, does the marketing
Yeah.
match the reality, right? Like,
Mhm.
as a benchmark slash ongoing, analysis of experience, that's absolutely brilliant, and I think it's funny, we all know it's missing, but yet somehow the industry has not moved. Anyway,
Yeah.
to that
Yeah.
point.
That goes back John, that goes back to what you
Yeah,
asked earlier, which is like, you can't move or make the case if you're a manager level stuck in the corner of talent attraction. And if you
yeah,
don't have
yeah.
budget, somebody posted on LinkedIn recently and said, you don't need any budget to do employer brand and recruitment marketing. And I was like, oh, I get it. There's a lot of, sole practitioners out there that are plugging away and doing it on their own. But you really do, if you're gonna move the needle, if you're gonna make a difference, you really do need to lobby for something because you at least have to have some data to get attention, and you need money to collect data.
100%. And something you said, I'll go back to it and then we'll move on. But just this notion that you can't sort of lump in an entire generation and then quantify or qualify an experience for that generation because contextually, how they're experiencing, let's say, hospitality on a cruise line versus a headquarters environment in, middle America, same generation, different environments that elicit different experiences. So you have to get down into the granularity, and the context always matters. Brilliantly stated. I want to shift a little bit to a macro headline. Earlier this month, growth revised down by 911,000 jobs through March. Some would say that's signaling an economy shaking, in its boots. let's bring this into our world, right? So less jobs, but yet we're still seeing talent attraction and even employer branding at the forefront of a lot of our clients' conversations. How do we square those circles, if you will?
I think it's a challenge because it's so complex in the macro environment that we're in, right? We would be remiss if we didn't think about a lot of those indicators, everything from politics to what's happening economically for organizations, things like the housing crisis or household debt increasing. And so it's impossible to look at it all or to make just individual correlations. We've got to really think about the big picture. That being said, I think the needs are and often are and have been over the years, I know you've experienced this too, very industry specific. And so, depending on where those industry needs are, right, of course, we're going to see a shift in tech with the advent of AI. There's no doubt about it. And then you're going to see some industries that will always have a need, like healthcare. I think the other really interesting challenge that we're facing in terms of, the attraction piece and why even when jobs are down, we're still seeing that is because there is so much disengagement and has been for so many years that you're always going to see some level of turnover. And you're always going to see some necessity to making sure that as an organization, you at least have a baseline reputation that exists and you're putting some investment into that. And organizations, even when they're contracting, they're always growing in some places because contraction does require growth, streamlining. So there's always some positions for the most part that are open. And, you also see a lot of shifts in terms of people moving. What's the average tenure of a CEO now? It's much, I don't know off the top of my head, but it's much lower than it ever was before.
Yeah, I think
The
it's like 5
bouncing
years
that's
on
happening
average.
yeah, the
Yeah.
bouncing that's happening is also indicative because every time you get a new CEO in, there's a trickle down attraction effect, right? To the turnover of the team underneath because strategies change. So once you get a new CEO, the ELT underneath, their strategies evolve. And then beneath that and beneath that. And every Fortune 500 company operates in this hierarchical way. Everybody wants to make their own mark, have their own voice, bring in their own people. So that cyclical nature, I think, will always bring us business. The difference is, can we shift from being reactive to proactive? Can we save our organization's money and be more thoughtful by being proactive? And that requires trust and the insights to do that, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll give you one more headline here. This is just out yesterday. So, seasonal retail hiring is to fall to its lowest mark since 2009. We have a lot of retail clients, right, who do seasonal campaigns and hiring. You factor that plus the rising cost per application or CPA, I think numbers are up almost 27% this year. Where does employer brand provide the relief in your perspective, right, to some of these challenges? What
I think one is in thinking about work in a different way. You're also seeing a decline. There was a rapid decline several years ago in college enrollment. That's changed a little bit, but I think you're going to see anytime the economy tanks, you also see a big shift for entry level hiring, right? From a university perspective, because those folks can't find jobs and really struggle. And so I think what happens is you'll see an opportunity for employer brand to say, hey, some of these careers that are typically seasonal could actually be really good opportunities for you. So traditionally, right, your college student isn't thinking, I want to go manage a retail store. That's not a traditional career path out of a university. But now, as we see things like, household debt increasing, for example, it's going to be really important to think about how do I actually support myself and where is there a stable opportunity? So maybe instead of hiring all these seasonal workers, you're actually creating more long term career paths. So fewer workers, but they're working more hours, for example. I also think we're in a world where customer service has dropped tremendously. I don't know about you, but everywhere from hotels to flights, I have seen a massive decrease in service. And there's just fewer people. And so I think organizations are also accepting that. And they're saying, you know what? My competitors aren't differentiating themselves through exceptional service. Neither should I. Right? You go into a retail store, it can be really hard to find, a particular worker to assist you with something. So I think they're also just accepting of that people are going to buy what they need to buy. They're going to suffer through it if there's no good alternative. And
Mm,
that's, I think, a big shift that's also happening that's driving some of that retail.
yeah,
And then, of course, the just the economic outlook. It'll be interesting to see what the holiday season looks like here in the U.S.
that's right.
Because the economic outlook right now is not great, but people do tend to rally around holiday time. So, Black Friday might be a really important day this year for many Fortune 500 organizations, more so than it's been since COVID.
That's right. Yeah, we'll be watching for sure. And I think you're making a lot of great points around the shift, right? And so we're seeing uh, AI, right? I think most of our favorite topics these days around AI, and even in the customer service space, I know companies like 11 Labs are snatching up a ton of contracts because of their AI voice platforms that now you might not even know if you're speaking to a human because they're that good. Um, Additionally, the pickup in, not the pickup, but the shift towards more long-term career pathing. I love that you brought that up because some of our clients who are some of the largest in the world, a lot of the common themes that we hear is people started at the store, right? And now they're in executive leadership. And I think we got away from that pathway from like getting in and understanding the business from the ground floor. And there's value and there's honor and nobility in taking that career path through and working your way up versus everybody going to get the degree and coming in at the middle or then rising through the ranks that way and never really understanding the business from the bottom up. I think there's positioning opportunity there, especially from a branding standpoint. But look, I want to shift into a major milestone for you for Shaker, and that is the recent announcement of the acquisition of exaqueo, and here we are now, which I think from a founder's perspective, and now at this next stage in your journey, talk to us a little bit about that experience for you, and why this matters, and why now, and what opportunities do you see in the future state here?
Well, I'm glad you asked. First, our team, myself particularly, we're just thrilled to be a part of the Shaker family and really excited about the opportunity. The organization has such an exceptional reputation, and at Exacqueo, we often competed against Shaker, and I think some of our clients are smiling broadly because they recognize that and recognize all of the talent that exists between the two organizations. For me, it's a chance to complete that life cycle, to be able to say, gosh, how do we take all of this great work we're doing on the recruitment marketing side in MarTech, in analytics, in programmatic, and how do we use data and insight then to drive that strategy? And how can we keep collecting that really valuable data? Understand from an insights perspective how we can actually influence the employment experience. Because ultimately, that's why we all do this work, right? We want to make an impact. Otherwise, we might be in private equity or banking or, something else. But I've spent my life's work focused, I always say, at the intersection of where business meets behavior. I started working when I was 13. I've had over 35 different jobs in my life. And this sort of the reason for working, why we work, the desire to have purpose and make meaning is just so important. And so to help organizations be able to deliver that to employees is just tantamount. It always has been to me in the past almost 14 years at Exacqueo, to our team, and now ultimately to be able to kind of close that loop and deliver full life cycle of services to our clients together. That's really exciting. Because beyond AI, right, the tech is really strong that exists in our space, but to be able to provide that strategic support across the whole life cycle, that's something that I'm really excited about doing.
Absolutely, and everybody is thrilled. I think our industry really stopped and took notice because two powerhouses coming together to advance what we're doing in this space is only going to be a net positive for those that we work with. So, really happy to call you colleague now.
Right
Um,
back at you.
yeah. So look, we've got a talent landscape that is moving very quickly in ways that we haven't seen in many, many years. I'd love to get your perspective on what's next. Right. So as we think about the frontier for employer brand, there's a lot of opportunity for us to make improvements that impact the talent attraction perspectives and the landscapes there. What do you see? What is the next frontier? AI is the obvious, but even the use of AI, where do you see it going?
I feel like we shouldn't ask that question. We should ask that question of everybody, and we should tell them they can't say AI as an answer.
I
They've
was
gotta
I
come
I
up
was thinking the same thing, and don't use
they've
AI
gotta
in
come
your
up with something
answers.
else.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're right, it is the obvious answer. For me, it's the antithesis of AI. It's the strategic piece, right? Because ultimately, all that's going to do is level the playing field for everybody. If you introduce that technology, ultimately everybody has access to that technology. So, what then differentiates you, not just as a company from a business value proposition, but what differentiates you from being an employer? What is different about your employment relationship? So, for me, what I think is really next is organizations being willing to take the people risks, saying we're going to differentiate ourselves in this way. And we're already seeing a little bit of that, not purposely, but I think organizations fell into it with this idea of return to office. Now, I've worked virtually for a long time. So, I have a personal opinion about the RTO mandates that organizations have? Sure. Do I want to return back to a corporate office 5 days a week? I personally don't. But I do value the fact that organizations are saying, hey, we're going to die. We're willing to die on this hill, right? And we're willing to say that this is how we're going to differentiate ourselves. We're willing to take that risk. And then they'll determine as an organization if that risk pays off or not. And so I think you'll start to see more organizations say, this is the only way we can differentiate ourselves is by saying we're going to behave this way as a company. We're going to treat our employees this way. So then there were some organizations that said, "Hey, we see the RTOs happening. We're not going to do that. We're going to double down on having hybrid or having flex or whatever it is that we're doing." That's where I think the future is finding that unique niche so you can really truly attract people that are interested in that kind of relationship. And, it mirrors what we're seeing in personal relationships too. People are being much more open and honest, right? If you look at back to Generation Z, they're saying things like, I don't want to have kids or I don't ever want to get married. And they're just putting that stake in the ground and no judgment on anyone's choices. But the idea of being comfortable, being vocal about who you are and what your expectations are as human beings, we're doing that. And so I think you'll start to see more of that from organizations as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's good, and yeah, no judgment, but a lot of these folks are like, "I can't afford kids, so no," because the rising
There's
cost of
that
everything.
too.
There's
I
that.
either have to commute I have to spend my money commuting or spend my
Lose
money
money
as
on
a
kids.
parent.
Right,
And as
right,
a
right.
parent, I'll tell you, I mean, you know this, right? Those kids, they cost a
It's
lot.
not
They
cheap.
sure do.
It's not
They sure
cheap.
do.
It is not cheap. Well, look, I love that we've arrived at a point where I think we've got so much information for the listener who's been along on this journey with us to consume and process. And I want to say before we close, I would love to get your perspective on this. So when we think about uh, leaving our listener with something that they can put into practice right away, what would you, in terms of how they can elevate their employer brand work, what's one piece of advice you would give our listeners that they can take with them?
Ask why. Every piece of data you get, ask why. Ask for more information. If you're working with a vendor or partner and they give you a piece of data, maybe it's one of the job boards that you work with, or maybe it's a vendor in your HR tech stack, and they say, X% of candidates are coming through this particular channel. Why? Dig deeper, ask why. Don't take data at face value. That's going to separate you from everybody else, from your competitors, and everyone else is getting the rich insights beyond just the data that's put in front of you and questioning it. Actually making sure you understand it because you've got to then turn around and tell the story internally. You can't tell story with data. People are like, wait,
Mm,
you can't? No, a story is made up of insights, right? So the data helps you to create the story, but it's really the insights you glean. Those are the headlines. CEOs don't need any more dashboards. They need a headline, they need a story, and they need the supporting evidence. So you as a practitioner need to just ask why and keep asking why until it's like, my 8-year-old son, why, mom? Why? Why? Until you're blue in the face, just keep asking why.
oh, that's so strong. And then be able to answer why when asked.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much for that rich insight. Thank you for this time, Susan. Like I said, it's a pleasure. As a fan from afar for years, and now I get to be right up close and personal, day to day, side by side with you. Absolutely honored. And thank you for being our first guest on a new season and a new entity of Shaker Unfiltered live at the Vision Lab. And for those who have joined us, found value, please do not hesitate to hit subscribe and the notification bell so you will get rings every time we upload new conversations that are helping you drive our industry forward. So until next time, we will see you right back here at Shaker Unfiltered. Take care.